Welcome to episode 222 of Silver Lining for Learning. I'm Punya Mishra, and with me are my co-hosts Chris Didi from Harvard, Kurt Bonk from Indiana, Young Zhao from Kansas and Melbourne, and living in Oregon. So that's Zhao. Lydia is not with us today. She's traveling. She's in China, so most probably, I'm guessing it's pretty late over there, and will not be joining us. Today, I'm excited about today's episode. We have guests from the Center for Reinventing Public Education, or CRPE. And we're going to talk about, well, all we talk about these days is AI and how it is actually playing out in the educational system. And so CERPI has been doing some really interesting research about what this means for our schools, how our schools in America actually using AI, which districts are actually at the forefront of things, experimenting and trying different things, and what are some gaps in how we are preparing future educators. So they have a couple of reports out on this. And so, we'll just open up a conversation about that. CERPI is a part of ASU's newly renamed Mary Lou. I actually have to read this out because it doesn't roll off my tongue yet. ASU's Mary Lou Fulton College for Teaching and Learning Innovation. And, they've been on this show before, episode 133 with Robin Lake and Travis Pillow, when we talked about what's happening in schools post-pandemic. Today, our guests are Michael Berardino and Steven Weiner. Michael's a senior research analyst, and Steven's a research analyst at CERPI. And I've known Steven for quite a while. He was a grad student in one of the classes that with me, decided to leave ASU, move to Portland, Oregon, take a job with CERPI, and then CERPI became a part of ASU. So there is no escape, and he is here with us today this morning as well. So with that, guys, I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about your background and the kind of work that you do at CERPI, and then we'll jump into a little bit of a conversation. So Michael, I'm going to pass the baton to you.
All right. Thanks for having us representing CERPI. Yeah, so I'm relatively new to the CERPI world. It's been about a year, and got dropped in the deep end on all of this AI research. We can talk more about all the work that CERPI has been doing, but it really was here's one of your two projects you're working on. Come in and try to get up to speed as fast as you can, which is a real daunting task with all things AI. Yeah, my background is in public policy. Really came about this working, looking at state policies. Background is looking at English learners, multilingual learners, and thinking about alternative accountability and assessment systems. And so it's my background. So it it marries with AI in like really interesting ways. And I think especially when we think about the reimagining of education in the age of AI. But certainly I will always admit that when I started doing this research, there was so much I didn't know, and I am still learning so much about this. And I'll leave it there. We can get more into the actual research further in the conversation.
Steven.
Great. Thanks for having us, Punya. And yeah, thanks for kicking us off, Michael. Yeah, so again, my name's Steven Weiner. I'm a senior researcher here at CERPI. I've been with CERPI, as you've heard us now call ourselves, the Center on Reinventing Public Education, multiple times. I've been with the organization for about 4 years, with Arizona State University, too long to count. So I will say, before I say a little bit about myself, I will also say for the folks who are maybe not in the CERPI bubble or close to it, just to let you all know, the kind of work we do is interesting in a number of ways, but maybe primarily because we are kind of a policy-oriented research center. So we are living, I think, in a very interesting place, especially within like the academic world of looking at research, looking at kind of like large systems level research around public education, and trying to understand what the implications are for improving and for making like wide scale improvements, and also understanding like wide scale challenges to public education. Something I think is a really interesting sort of guiding philosophy for CERPI is that we believe that public education, we say it's a set of goals, not a set of institutions. So we kind of think about all sorts of different kinds of configurations and structures in the educational landscape, and kind of look for innovations in all sorts of different places. So I'll say that, and I'll say that this is like immediately resonant with me, and was when I started as well, because I come from a very interdisciplinary background that looks at learning sciences, that looks at like design theory, looks at futures thinking and systems thinking, and all of this sort of kind of this multidisciplinary lens, I think is useful in SERP's work because we like to look at every level of the system. So when it comes to AI, for example, we do everything from like talk to teachers and kind of building leaders of schools all the way up to like the folks who are leading districts and even working on the technology behind AI. So we take a multi-level approach to looking at these things. And maybe I will also just say that given I have a background in STEM education and also this kind of innovation lens from my PhD work, it's really interesting. AI is a very, very interesting place to be because we're seeing yet another big technology potentially have an effect on education writ large. So very excited to do the work in this area. Last thing I'll say is I also have a background as a teacher, kind of still think of myself as like a high school teacher at heart. And so it's like really important, I think, for us to keep bringing in like the educator perspectives and know how they are encountering AI and what it looks like for them to actually use it responsibly, ethically, equitably.
Cool.
Guess leave it there.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the really cool things with SERPI being a part of is like of the teachers of the college here is that intersection of the research and the policy stuff, where I think SERPI is really good, which I think most academics are not, in speaking to the broader sort of policy spaces, and being leaders in that. So I think there's a really good intersection there. Anyway, so I'm going to kick us off. If you go to the website with the blog for the episode, you'll see there are links to a couple of reports that SERPI has come up with. So let's just start with the broad question. What has your research into AI integration in K-12 uncovered? What are some big trends and challenges and opportunities you're seeing? And in parallel, I will just add like a little thing about like what are you seeing in teacher prep as well, right? Because you have these two reports that are there. And again, the stuff is moving so fast. So these are always snapshots in time and maybe out of date by the time the report comes out, right? But what are you seeing, and what are some trends and challenges that you're seeing there? And anybody can start off, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I'll kick us off and then pass over to Stephen. So I think I'll focus on one of the research projects that I'm working on, where we did our best to talk to several of the early adopter districts that we're seeing across the country. And really, at the start of this project, we realized like there's just a lot of baseline information that we felt like was missing. Just like setting the context for this, like people are jumping to use cases, jumping to like this could solve this specific problem. But we really wanted to take a step back, and especially as Stephen pointed out, like really think about this at the system level. So we did a multi-step process to we did we solicited uh, through our networks. We looked for recommendations for who early adopters were, and we were looking at both K-12 districts, traditional districts, and CMOs, and we ended up with a pile of 80 or so districts. And after going through all the information we could find, we really realized that the ones that were actually doing systemic work more than just like a one-off pilot, just like a small little pocket of work. We really identified about 40 or so districts that we felt were early adopters, whittled it down a little bit, and we ended up talking to 22 districts across the country that we really see as like ahead of the curve, really doing a lot of this work. And the first thing that has come to the fore in this work is they're doing really innovative, thoughtful, intentional work. But even amongst these early adopter districts, we're still really in early days here. Like the amount of system-wide use is very limited, even in the districts that are furthest ahead. And I think it's an important piece of context as we go through this conversation that like the tension between the hype around AI, how much it's in the news, and then the reality in K-12 institutions about how it's actually being used in a typical classroom. And so there is like this balance, this tension that we're almost seeing between the hype and the reality. So it's kind of like the first thing we saw. And when we when we talk to them about how they're using AI and what types of problems they're looking to solve, there's like a number of things that they're trying to look through. A lot of it's teacher focused, really. Then there's a lot around central office challenges, automating a lot of tasks, supporting HR, transportation, a lot of things. And then kind of below that is more of the student facing things. Like there's still a little hesitancy and resistance to actually implement student-facing AI tools. And overwhelmingly, the tools, the practice, the things that the districts are actually implementing right now are really teacher-focused, and it's really about at this time how to think about improving teacher efficiency, so lesson planning, um, maybe helping with some of the tasks that they have to do on the administrative tasks they have to do. And that's really kind of where we are right now. I'll say one more piece about this. However, there are we've created like this emerging typology to help us understand where districts are right now. And there's four categories. We have the dabblers, those who are like, think of themselves as innovative, and so they are pushing out like, oh, try some AI tools, try this, but there's not really a coherent like vision for why they're using AI. We see there's this category of emerging users, and this is where the bulk of our early adopters are, where there's some coherence, there's like central office, and the teachers are really communicating about what they're using for the tools, but they're still early in that. And then there's a handful that we're calling system changers, where they have a broader vision in mind, that they see AI as the tool to help them achieve that vision. So exciting things around competency-based education, UDL, where they see AI as the tool to help them achieve their larger strategic vision. And then kind of like the last piece of this continuum are the ones we're calling the reimaginers, where these are the districts where we see like they spent the time to do planning and really think about what they want their students to be prepared for in the age of AI, and what that would mean for redesigning curriculum, redesigning standards, redesigning schools so that students can be ready for this new world. And so those are kind of that's kind of what we're seeing in our amongst our early adopters at this time. And yeah, and the like in amongst the reimaginers, I'll share a couple of examples. Like there's a district in Georgia that created a new AI themed high school, and they created K-12 standards. And so this has allowed them to reform the middle schools that feed into that high school. And so now all of a sudden all these students and they had to think about what type of support students would need and what type of information they 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 would need to be taught to be able to be prepared to participate in this AI themed high school. And so you really think about that as like a reimagining of what school is, and a real shift um, uh, from what a traditional high school would be and what the traditional standards would be. So that's kind of like our some of our big emerging themes right now, that like we're still early days, but there are some real like innovative forward thinking districts that are, and a note about those in those top two categories is a real notable thing is that most of them started this work before the release of ChatGPT, right? Like they were already thinking about this 5, 6, 7 years ago, and that really makes a big difference because it does take a lot of intentional, time-consuming work to get your head around what AI could do in your schools and how you want to redesign your schools around AI.
Thank you, Michael. Stephen, anything briefly you want to add?
Yeah, briefly, it's tough because it's like hearing Michael, it makes me think that at CRPE we've been really working in earnest around AI for maybe a few years now, but we've already learned a lot and we're doing a lot of different kind of work around it. I will say that the work that I've done has really been a little bit more explicitly about teacher prep and teacher preparation from two angles. One from the district side, from like basically in-service teachers. And then also on the pre-service side, there was a separate study and some research around what are higher education institutions doing. I might hold off on that second part for a minute because that's its own thing, although there's connections. But I will say from the research that we're seeing, which is Michael described sort of a very intentional selection process around early adopters. CRPE has also been working with RAND and through a project called the American School District Panel, or ASDP, to get maybe a slightly more, I would not say representative sample, but a more widespread range of perspectives on what school districts are doing. That project is actually about a bunch of different topics, but we've put AI into it, and just having a few questions in a survey and then doing some interviews. And all I can say is that there's a lot of resonance around this idea that the focus right now, even for not early adopters, but folks who are just trying to get their teachers up to speed on AI at all, there's a real focus on reducing fear and reducing kind of like misconceptions, and really just getting teachers to engage with AI to understand what it is, and not to kind of reflexively look at it as simply a cheating tool, as a tool for plagiarism, as basically like a liability for teachers. We hear through ASDP, we heard like a lot of different perspectives. All of the perspectives we did hear were for folks who were trying to do something with AI, right? So we weren't necessarily hearing from folks who had done nothing. But even with the folks who were maybe among the earlier adopters, these are system leaders, these are superintendents and administrators saying that, many of them will say, well, we have teachers who are really kind of gung-ho about the work, interested in at least engaging in AI and understanding what it is. But we virtually all of them also had folks, and in larger numbers, that were not there. They were really kind of worried about it. Almost every district we heard from said something to the effect of like, we have teachers who are calling for it to be banned. We're looking at people who just don't want to have anything to do with it. So I think like, just to kind of amplify and maybe provide some evidence that backs up like what Michael is seeing from the early adopters, I think there's a push among some leaders in districts to create an environment where engagement is okay. There's like a safe space for it, and I think we'll have some new data coming out in a few months that show that even there, like, we still have a long ways to go. Last year, I think it was last April, CRPE put out a report that showed just over, I think it was like around 20% of educators have had some AI training, and we know that has increased substantially since then, but there's a long way to go. And we also know, and this is maybe just an important point to end on here, we also know that there is an equity gap. Teachers who are getting prepared, there's if you look at schools that are high poverty, there's much lower rates of preparation for those schools and districts than for low poverty districts. So we're cognizant that there is like possibly a kind of a teacher prep gap there as well. Much more to say on all of that.
Sure.
But I'll leave it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That's a great setup. And I think, Chris, I think you want to go next. So jump right in.
Will do. I am very interested in AI, but I want to take a step back and just talk about CRPE for a minute and its history. I love the verb in the title of the center, reinventing, because it's not improving. It's not making more efficient. It's not kind of doing things better. It's a doing better things title. And I'm curious as to how, if at all, the aspirational vision has changed over roughly 3 decades of CRPE's existence. As context for me, I did my dissertation over half a century ago. Part of that dissertation was an aspirational vision for what K-12 education could become. I'm still waiting. So I will say that the vision has evolved, certainly in my mind, as to what's possible, but the fundamentals of the vision, I'm still waiting. And I'm sure I'm not alone in that respect. having been disappointed by the pace of change in education. But what how does the center work to not just to inform, but actually to reinvent? I'd like to hear about that. And it sounds like the focus on the imaginers is part of this.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Chris. I don't think that I certainly don't think that within a few minutes I could like summarize the many decades of work and the evolution that our center has gone through around this question. I will say, I started off saying that there is a kind of a very, very deep-seated value at CRPE around we don't think of public education as one institution or a set of institutions, but we think of it as a goal, which basically I think means that we have a multi-pronged, I wouldn't say we have like one vision of what like a better education system should be, but we also aren't afraid to like look in a bunch of different directions. So we've done work, and we did work for years around I mean, this goes back quite a ways around like portfolio districts, where districts were sort of had like a variety of different schools and they had like a lot more autonomy. We did work around personalized learning about 5 or 6 years ago, and I think there's still like a lot of interest around that. But I think we're just like willing to look wherever there is promise for bringing quality education to more students, giving more students access to the things that they need. And I would also say I think that there's been maybe if there's been like an evolution more recently, I think it is bringing in more voices, being more inclusive, and making sure we're hearing from students, from parents, and also from educators, and kind of understanding like, well, from where you're at now, what do you need? Obviously, in the pandemic, we like saw that very quickly. We saw like parents were really, really interested in not having their students sit in front of screens. We did a whole lot of work around like learning pods. So anyway, without going too much further into that, I would say that when it comes to AI, we bring the same kind of focus when it comes to AI, which is we want to understand how this can help improve people's experiences where they're at, but also give them maybe a push to reimagine and not be constrained by the current institutions that they're in. I don't know, Michael, if you have any follow-up.
No, that was great. Yeah, I'm just thinking about it from a bringing it back to the AI perspective, right? Like the so much of right, like as researchers, we're not trying to, we don't have the answer in mind. We really want to like understand from our districts. And so a lot of it is like when you think about systems change, and a lot of it does end up feeling like uncovering what's getting in the way. Like, and that's like the barriers that those are that feels like a real, it's we those are the barriers we run up against when thinking about reimagining education. It's just like there are like clear barriers in the way. And so that's like I think one of the things that we always want to do is like really highlight like how much work it would take to reimagine. Like there's things that are just getting in the way from allowing educators to even reimagine. And I think AI is like a perfect example. And one of the things we keep coming up against in this work is the notion of AI literacy and just how much we think about like AI literacy, like the knowledge and skills to even to understand the technology, understand its uses, like and its potential risks and benefits, like thinking about it more broadly and how it manifests. We're really seeing like, as Stephen pointed out, like in the for a lot of teachers and a lot of people, it's still in this like mistrust world, like where it's leading to people mistrusting the technology. They think they can do a better job than the AI could, or they think it's going to take their jobs. Um, then there's this misuse piece where the AI literacy, lack of AI literacy means that like people are like maybe not using it correctly, or they're not accounting for biases and other things that may be embedded in the technology. But really, what we see is like one of the biggest issues with AI literacy is the missed opportunities, right? Like with AI literacy being low, people often are district leaders and educators are often responding to what ed tech gives them. And so they're getting these tools from other people, and they're like, oh, this sounds like an interesting thing, and then they're thinking about how to apply that in their schools, in their districts. And a lot of times those tools are focused on efficiency. It's about how to make the current system better. And if we take that time to really raise all of our AI literacy, and I'll be the first to admit my AI literacy, I feel like is the more I do this work, the more I feel like my literacy is pretty low. Like I don't have that potential to think about like how can this technology be like a truly disruptive moment to rethink what and reimagine what our schools could be, and how we could serve our students better. And so I think that's like a clear place that CRPE wants to push in, is like thinking about how are schools addressing, how are districts addressing AI literacy, and then pushing that to be like, how can we convene the people that have the AI literacy with the practitioners and the ed tech so that we can generate tools that can allow for people to dream, because it's like there's too much blocking our dreams right now.
Yeah. And can I add one more thing onto that? And sorry, Chris, I know I think that like hearing what you just said, Michael, made me think of one more point to your specific question around like what do we do in terms of like sort of our active role in reinvention. I'd like to say that what we do is we find the things that show that reinvention is impossible, or excuse me, is not impossible, but is possible. I think that there is real power where researchers put their lens, right? What we focus on and what we show. So if we find a school district or a school that's doing something interesting, what we want to show is how they enabled those things to happen. What were the conditions? Were they state policy conditions? Were they district conditions? Was it clever ways of using funding? Whatever it is, because I think that there is a tendency within educational institutions and with maybe within the whole kind of realm to not be able to see, right? To have some challenges to reimagining things. So when we find things that show that it's possible, I'll point to a research study that I led about a year or so ago around new teacher roles and showing that, yeah, it is in fact possible for teachers to act in different ways, to team teach, to work differently with students and these sorts of things. And here are real places where it's happening. So I think that is, there's a tension. We're researchers, we're not practitioners, but we can amplify the people who are doing the work, and then we can point specifically to what systemic things enabled, and as Michael said, what things do they not have blocking their way that make reinvention possible.
Well, you've both done a good job of addressing the question that I raised, which is the reason that I wanted to take a step back. As I look at how AI is being used without having done the kind of systemic sampling that you have, I would say that most of the time it's used as a kind of digital duct tape to try to hold together an obsolete industrial education system. And so in that respect, it's a step backwards, not because AI is intrinsically a step backwards, but because people are using it to cling to the past. And what educators don't realize as part of AI literacy, and I wish that it was stressed more within AI literacy, is that anything that AI can do in teaching and learning at appropriate quality will be done by AI in the workplace. Because it's easier to make something that just does it than it is to make something that's glass box and can explain how it's doing it and so on. And so when we use the digital duct tape, what we're doing is preparing students to lose to AI in the workplace as opposed to preparing them to complement AI. I see that Yang is ready to jump all over this, so I'm going to toss the ball to him.
Actually, I think Kurt was supposed to go next, I think, right?
No, I asked Kurt to give me permission because my question is seriously related to Chris' question. Basically, public policy has not done nothing to improve American education or close the achievement gap. So that is problem since 1970s, 1960s. I don't know why you guys are still doing what you're doing. So the real question is, I was just tracing the data of equity this morning. If you look at Americans' household income, the gap has widened. the middle class has shrunk. If you look at the achievement data, still poor students continue to do poorly, rich kids continue to do better. And so when you talk about, I like Chris, I said, I love your, the reinventing education. Sounds great. But the research you guys just described, there is nothing new. I mean, if you look at 1990s, we did the same thing. Teachers were worried that their jobs would be replaced. They're anxious. And we created state standards, literacy for them to become digitally literate, to be digitally competent. 1990s. We in Pune, when we were in Michigan, I was involved in the state creating the seventh standard to make sure teachers are competent. Didn't really work. And right now, even like AI, I like Chris, your analogy, the digital duct tape. And it is very well. I just published an article in Educational Leadership on if schools don't change, AI, the power of AI cannot do anything. And also, I think the idea to define AI literacy is completely misguided. And really, what can you do to do that? And particularly, I'm really interested in say, I'm also on the board of Digital Promise, which again spends a lot of money. I'm asking them the same question to say, what are we actually trying to do that can help the poor kids with today's technology? I think over relying on, think about this, teacher training, professional development, teacher education. How long will that happen before you can transform or reinvent public education? So I'm really curious about Steven and Michael. And Steven, you're good. I saw that you have the diploma from Arizona State on your wall, so that's nice. So you have a good recognition. And on Oregon, Portland, Oregon is a good place to be. But anyway, so my question is, I want you guys to imagine what could happen if we give AI to students. Just forget about all the existing structure. I really don't like, I think the central office standards going down. I don't think that's going to work. We've seen that kind of strategies have many times. If you look at numerous times. So I'm just curious to say, what are you guys thinking? If you want to reinvent education, what could be reinvented? I mean, you talk about the blocks to changes. I mean, God, how many books have been written about all the problems schools face? So we know all of those. So what if we give AI to students to redefine learning? I'm just curious about this.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I'll answer your question, but first, what I'll say is, I think there's something worth pointing out about what we do here at CRPE, which is this is precisely why we also do work around charter schools, why we've done research around micro schools. I think like you would find a diversity of opinions even between Michael and I, and also within everyone at CRPE around like, to what extent can the system be changed at all? Like to what extent can central offices be redesigned, which is actually something we're actively talking about right now as part of our research. So I would just say like, yeah, we're not here, again, we're not here to defend necessarily the current system, but we also do want to show where there is like some potential. So, I mean, I'll say that like, and then maybe to your question around like what happens when you give students AI and what would that mean? You're making me think of kind of another big research study we've done around AI, around teacher prep in the pre-service side with higher education institutions. And so we surveyed about 70 higher education institutions, and we said, what are you doing to prepare your pre-service teachers around AI? We actually asked for, we reached out to about 500 and we got back about 70. So that tells you something. Among those that we heard from, what we heard was not a lot. And like really like just sort of, I wouldn't say silence, because we know that there are things that are happening in some higher education institutions, but structurally, very few higher ed teachers, teacher colleges, prep programs, they are not rethinking the way their teachers should teach. In fact, what they are saying is, just like at the K-12 level, they're saying, oh, our students are using AI and we're not. Like they're ahead of us. So, I mean, I think basically to your point, I think that's what's happening. I think students, pre-service teachers, and also in the K-12, like, K-12 students, they're using AI. And if the systems don't change, there's so much potential. And I don't want to like overstate. I would say I don't necessarily think personally that AI is like gonna change everything necessarily. I don't think we know that, but I do think that the speed at which this is happening and the capacities that it's opening up are threatening to make some of these institutions somewhat obsolete. And one last thing I'll say on this. So when we were talking to superintendents, we asked some of them, where do you look for guidance around AI? And you know what none of them said was higher education teacher prep programs. Even when like deliberately asked, we said, do you all think that the colleges and universities that are preparing your teachers, and again, this is a small sample. I don't want to overstate the thing, but we did not see the people who are running the current schools look towards higher ed teacher prep as a place where their teachers were going to learn anything about AI, how to engage with it ethically or effectively. And we also just, some of them also just said, we don't really look towards the teacher prep programs for much help at all. So maybe that's like a little bit far afield from where you started, Yang, but I think that that's a huge issue.
Well, I think they're right. That's encouraging. They're not look at teacher colleges for help, you know. Michael, you have any?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to keep in mind that like not focus on AI as necessarily as the solution, as the thing that's gonna like just AI alone is never gonna do anything, right? Like it need at the very least, maybe we can't get the lofty goals of reinventing, but let's say even if we're just trying to like think about how AI can improve the current, be that actual digital duct tape, right? Like I think what we're seeing is like it at the very least, it's critical to have AI attached to like a larger strategic vision. So like you have to have your like vision for how you want to reform education for students. It's not just AI is not going to change anything if you're still just like having a really traditional class structure of lecturing to students or taking, traditional assessments and you're not giving kids more opportunities for engagement. So I mean, I think that's like the first thing that we definitely want to like say is that like AI isn't a thing on its own. Like it needs to have that larger strategic vision. And as you said, we've had decades of research knowing how hard it is even just to implement that strategic vision and get the buy-in and get all the necessary stakeholders to get on board with something. I think Stephen and I, one of the things we both love to talk about is competency-based education. And, it's been around for a long time, but like the amount of like the number of like actual proof points that we have that this is going to improve like education for all students is limited. And so you just think about like that's like the pre-existing condition, and then thinking about like how hard it is for people to adopt new technology on top of it, that does become a really daunting task. um, and I do think there's like a real promise in like just when you give kids technology, like they always find new uses for it that weren't expected in the first place. And like one of the districts we're working with, they created their own tool, their own AI tool that like incorporates student interest. It like keeps track of their search history and tracks what they're doing in their Google Docs for papers. Like, so it's really supposed to be building on their aptitudes and interests. And what they found is like the students ended up using it for many different purposes than what they originally intended. And so I do think like part of this is like giving the kids the opportunity to like show what they find interesting and how they'd want to use this in ways that like adults just aren't, we're already like stuck in our growth in a lot of ways, right? Like, so we shouldn't be the ones with the AI technology. Like, it'd be great to give the kids like free reign. I will say, like, back to reality, like, so, like, some of the issues that we're coming up against are around like the data privacy, the policy issues that like there are just a lot of places, a lot of states in the country where there's just not guidance yet, right? Like so there's not even a safe place for as Steven said, for to provide the teachers a place to play. Like there's a lot of hesitancy. And so like I love the idea of like creating a playground and a safe place for people to play. And it shouldn't just be central office, it shouldn't just be the teachers. I do love the idea that like everyone should be able to play. And then kind of the other thing, then another thing that SERPE always puts up against is like, do we even have the structures to learn what is working and what isn't working? So say we do find a really incredible positive use for this, like have we created the tracking to actually understand like the either informally or formally, like what is actually working out there? And that's a thing that like a lot of people are using AI right now. Like, I don't know what the number is now, 50% were using it every week, once a week last year. I bet it's probably closer to like 75% are using these tools every week. But we don't have that way to like understand across these what's working. And instead it is like the ed tech companies are the ones that are telling us how things are working and how they should be working instead of having that more grassroots approach. So um, in short, I love the idea of giving students a safe place to play with the tools and really just like unlocking their imagination and then seeing what they're actually interested in and what they could, how
Well,
they could, yeah,
So
unlock this.
thanks.
I have to
Go ahead,
Zhao,
Punya. I'm just sending you guys the article I wrote out of desperation. So you guys
yeah.
take a
So
look. This
here's
is a
the
shorter
thing.
version of it. Yeah.
Here's the thing. What I mean, there's some statistic, I don't remember it right now. The number of children in middle school today who have had exposure to some kind of a deep fake of their own friends in sexually compromising ways. Okay. This technology, to be honest, I don't think is ready for prime time for education. It has been foisted on us by this narrative of inevitability. So I have huge concerns about this technology in the first place, whether it has any clear role to play in education beyond all the hype around it. I mean, I'll be honest with it. And I play with it all the time, right? And I have a sort of sense of what it can be useful for and what it can't be. And so I have some significant concerns about it getting into the K-12 space, honestly, in any space for that matter. But also that we are also looking at an age where the level of misuse and things like that can be exponential. I mean, we have seen that with social media. So that there are some significant concerns there as well. I mean, there is this ideal thing like, yeah, let's the kids play with it, but they are not approaching, these tools are not being presented necessarily to them as being neutral tools. They are being presented to them with certain baggages and things that are coming in, right? So broader political, social, economic stuff that's going on, which I think we need to recognize that this is a bigger story than that. So just a caveat. I know, Kurt, you've been waiting very patiently, so I will bump it to you.
Go ahead. If you have any final comment, Young. Okay. Thanks for the article, Young. As I was listening today, I was writing copious notes from time to time here, and I wanted to ask about the obvious stuff, like who are your main users and where's your funding come from? But I want to go to the opposite, with the non-obvious kinds of things. And I started thinking to myself about professional development as the conversation was leading to that early on here. I remember sitting in a bus right before COVID in Edinburgh after a conference, and the conference had ended. We're going to go on a tour, and a guy behind me on the bus taps me on the shoulder, and he says, "We're using your free book in Tanzania to train all the teachers there about online learning and how to motivate students." And I wrote down, I kind of wonder what your bus moments have been. I've been sitting at my desk around that same time, sitting at my desk, and someone in the UAE wrote me a note, says, can we translate your primers on how to teach online to Arabic? We want to use them across the whole country, and in Saudi Arabia as well. And then they're using military bases and schools. And these were created for IU professors, and all of a sudden they're being used in all sorts of different ways that I hadn't anticipated. So I'm kind of wondering, how is SERPE research and thought papers being used by the non-obvious clients out there? Would you like to tell some stories about that? And then the parallel question is, are there non-obvious ways in which you're getting funded? Are there, we hear the typical ways. What are there some funders out there that people might be interested in who run similar or centers who have aspirations to do so that might say, hey, that's a possibility for us too. But the first off is the emotional highs that one gets when someone's using your work that you hadn't anticipated. Even on Silver Lining for Learning, we get contacted all the time by people we hadn't anticipated would be using our podcasts in different ways, shapes, and forms. So, and I know Michael started to address this when he was getting at the types of learners out there, the more entrepreneurial ones and the other one, but not directly. So, would either of you like to contribute something in that regard, the non-obvious things?
Well, yeah, I mean, and this is like, maybe I'll preface this by saying, I'm not sure if Michael has any like insight into this. This might be a little bit outside of our range, and like also with respect to the AI work, it's still pretty new. So I'm not sure we've had any train or bus moments or specifically around that kind of work. I do know that we put out a kind of a very wide lens analysis of post-COVID data on it was like state level student data and how transparent it was for parents to access. This got quite a bit of attention a few months ago, and it actually led to some states seeing our review and saying, "Oh wow, our state data is super not transparent, and so we're actually going to make changes." So that's like a very clear and also I'd say pretty rare occurrence, to see like such a direct impact in the world. I would say that what we often try to do with a lot of our research is feed it back into the systems and to the communities that we are working with, to help them reflect and see what they're doing and understand what they're doing from kind of an outside lens to help them improve and just kind of have like a different perspective. But I would say that like, yeah, in general, it's hard to know with this AI work where we're at as far as like who's picking it up. I don't know. Yeah, again, I'll say I don't know if Michael, you have any kind of insights into this. I will say one thing as far as like you were asking like whose work is of interest that we're working with as far as funders or philanthropies that are kind of worth knowing about. And one group that we're just starting to work with now is called Silicon Schools. And they're doing work, it's exclusively in California, but I would say that they're kind of a really interesting group. But we work with a lot of folks that are, I would say, putting money towards AI research in education, perhaps heedless of Punya's reservations about that.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, like nothing that comes to mind feels particularly non-traditional, or like this work, like CRPE's made a point to last year CRPE had a big like gathering convening in the desert in New Mexico, and it brought together some of these early adopter practitioners, but also the ed tech folks and the unions and the funders, importantly. And then the other group that's like is playing a big role that we see, like especially in the AI literacy space and kind of the PD professional learning, especially for district leaders, are these networks that have been cropping up. So led by groups like Chiefs for Change, McKinsey, but then also some like new groups, AI for Equity, and some individuals, Adam Gary and Jeff Utek, that are really helping out, just helping these district leaders get their heads around it. And I think what we're seeing, I'm a little off the question now, but like one of the things we're definitely seeing is that there's a it feels like a pretty big vacuum. Stephen talked about the colleges of ed not really taking a role in this, but we also see this from a lot of states not taking a leadership role. So there is like a vacuum. So I do think there's an opportunity for this, consultants and these groups are helping to help fill in some of this space. So I'd say not non-traditional, but definitely like a priority of getting all these leaders in the same room so that they can learn from each other, I'd say is like one of the things that we're seeing come out of this when we think about AI specifically.
It's a good example. Thank you for that.
So I'm looking at the time. We are 9 minutes away from the hour. Like I said, the hour just zooms by. So I'm going to kick off. Any other questions or comments from you guys, Chris, Zhao, Kurt?
I had one, if you
Okay,
don't
go for
mind.
it. We'll keep it brief, and then I'll
Yeah,
come to
yeah.
the summative question that we had discussed before. So go ahead, Kurt.
So what research haven't you done and you're on the cusp of doing? Or what have you recently completed that you want to promote? Either one of you, just.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about, I mentioned we're just starting to get work done with this group of schools that are all convening together to kind of work it kind of as a kind of a community of practice, learning together around AI. And I think it's a really interesting model, not a new model, but an interesting model for AI because it gives, I think, people a chance to reflect on like common problems that they're having, common challenges, and maybe even tensions that they're seeing with AI, despite wanting to solve different problems, right? So some of the schools in this group, and this is a group of about 20 schools in California, we're just starting to work with them, but they're really starting to like look at like, well, how do I have AI work with students, or what does it mean for AI to help solve a problem that would relate to like teacher capacity around lesson planning? Or a particularly interesting question I heard come up is, can AI help new teachers and help teacher instructional coaches train up new teachers and maybe even like help analyze observations, right? So there's a lot of new questions coming. There's a lot of, to Michael's point, we don't really know what success looks like. And so I think that this is the thing I would say, I would just want to keep us on the, like, when we look forward, is to recognize that as we're putting these things into practice, we have to be really reflective on what success looks like. Maybe we don't know it yet. Maybe we don't know it until we see it. And so I think that this is it's a challenge. I'll say this, in working with some folks who are at the forefront of AI in education, even they put forward sort of use cases for how a teacher might use AI, but they will say, we don't really know if these work. They will say, we're still at the very beginning. So these are use cases with kind of questionable success outcomes, and so maybe that's like just a kind of a really important place to be, and to not like, there's no best practices. I'll say that.
Yeah, and I'll add some of the other things that we're gonna push into further, like obviously a big focus on AI literacy, and as Punya pointed out, like just the importance of like knowing like this topic exists, right? Like we have to confront it one way or the other, and like understanding the risks as well as the benefits, right? Like, and I think understanding current levels of understanding, but then also the approaches, like what the reality of this kind of vacuum that exists is like people are getting trained formally or informally, and so understanding what's happening, and if there is like who can step in to kind of direct the training and and spreading the AI literacy. For in the short term, we're definitely want to push in more about the potential and how systems are using AI with special populations. So students, thinking about the students on IEPs or 504 plans, multilingual learners, right? Like, I definitely think like some of the most promising things are just like the translation services, the translation capabilities, and a lot of these tools are just, we've grown so much over the past 5-10 years. And so just as a parent communication tool, things like that. So just like pushing in to learn how districts are approaching kind of the targeted use of this with, some of the student groups that have had the most persistent opportunity gaps. And I'd say the last piece is there is a lot of emerging research, and I know a goal for CRPE and for some other organizations is try to like, instead of having all this research be competing, like what if we, trying to push to a place where we have like a more umbrella and unified research approach, and the research that's being put out that gets shared to people. And then, as Stephen was pointing out, importantly, make sure that researchers are responding to what the needs of like the end users are. Like, what are the people that are actually the students, the families, the schools, like what do they want to have the research on? And so like have it be, you know, reciprocal, where it's like we, instead of everyone competing and kind of making things more hype based and, trying to promote their tools, we actually have like a more uniform research approach. And I know that's a thing that CRPE really wants to push and work with some other leading organizations to help that happen.
Let's see, we're about out of time here. Punya, you want to jump in for your final thoughts there? Thank you, guys.
So, and Chris, I think, is going to introduce the next episode. So that's funny. Stephen, I was reminded of something when he said that we don't know what the best practices are. And I think that there are no best practices. And I think, Zhao, I'm going to quote you on this. Not about just about AI, right? If you remember way back at Michigan State, you had said this thing about PGP, sort of a play on encryption, the PGP encryption, which is pretty good practice. And I actually wrote a blog post about it that I'm going to drop here many years ago. And we actually got cited. So I actually give you credit for the term in that blog post. And then it got cited in an article that Stephen Greenhaw wrote. So PGP is the way to go, which is pretty good practice. We know this works here. Is it guaranteed to work in other contexts? But I got to try. Maybe I can learn. Maybe I can transfer. I can translate. I can, make changes to it. So I've always loved that term. And so going back in history too, I don't know, this must have been like, when I first started at Michigan State. So it must have been like 99 or so, 2000, like 25 freaking years ago. I can't even believe that, but yep, there it is. Anyway, I know we are tight on time, so I'm going to give you guys 30 seconds to quickly say what's missing from the discussion, right? If you, because you've been looking at this landscape and you're saying, okay, parents are doing this, teachers are doing that, leaders are doing the following, colleges are doing, etc. Researchers are writing this. What do you think is missing? What are we not talking about? 30 seconds each. Michael, I'll go to you first, or Stephen, whoever wants to go first. That's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Unprepared, but I'll say the why, right? Like we're all talking about AI, but it's like I just want everyone just to like be able to say why we're talking about it, right? Like that just feels like we're skipping past the why and we're being forced to talk about AI. And I think there's, promising practices and there's potential, but like why? So
Yeah.
yes,
No, thank you. I love that. I mean, I always joke about like nobody was sitting in October of 2022 saying what I really need is a chatbot, which will hallucinate once in a while, make shit up. That's what I really need to transform education, right? I mean, we weren't sitting around for the solution, but here it is. Anyway, Stephen, 30 seconds.
Yeah, that's great. That's such a good, concise way of putting it, Michael. I would say I would actually go back to what Chris said about it feels to me, I mean, I'm really just speaking for myself here. It feels like an elephant in the room that if your chatbot or your personalized learning AI bot can teach your student advanced math or amazing rhetoric or whatever it is, it can also do those things or most of those things in the workplace. So I think it's just a matter of like confronting this, like what is education for now, given the potential impact AI is going to have on society and on the economy? Because if it's teaching calculus, it can do it. And the question becomes why then does a student need it? And as a fan, I think calculus is beautiful. But anyway, so I'll leave it at that. Like it's a question of what are the ends here if we've created something that's going to truly disrupt the kind of the greater world, the economy, and
All right.
yeah.
Thank you. That's great. I love these two. I think they pair up really well as questions we should be thinking about. Chris, on to you to introduce the next episode.
So I want to thank both of you for participating today. Your work is really important. I'm very much looking forward to hearing about the Imaginers and what kinds of systemic visions they have about education. So thank you. Episode 223 is about the last of the 5 national AI institutes funded by the National Science Foundation that are tasked with working in education. So episode 207, 208, 210, 214 were all about 4 of those institutes, the 4 that are pre-college. Next week, we will look at the institute that I'm part of, which is about workforce upskilling and reskilling, higher education as an entry to occupational growth, and so on. And we're looking forward to completing the suite of the 5 and bringing in the ideas and insights that are part of as I said, the institute I'm associate director for research for. So we hope you'll tune in at noon next Saturday. Thank you.